Welcome to the best horror movie you never saw, where we shine a light on horror movies that you may have missed, haven't seen in a long time, or just plain forgot about. In this episode, we're diving into 1990's Jacob's Ladder, directed by Adrian Lyne, starring Tim Robbins, Elizabeth Pena, and Danny Aiello. The early 90s is said to be a rough period for the horror genre, but November 2nd, 1990 presents a bold counter-argument to that assertion.
Trick or treat, motherfucker.
Jacob's Ladder is the stuff of nightmares, full of surreal imagery that sticks with you long after the movie is over. Once you close your eyes to sleep at night, every frame of this film is ingrained in your psyche. That's what true horror is all about. It lingers with you and sticks to the very fiber of your being. It also toys with some deep psychological elements that allow its story to frighten you on an even more cerebral level. Let's put it this way. There is no need for a clever hook to get you involved. The whole experience is purely freaking terrifying, and there's no shame at admitting to watching this with the covers pulled up to your face.
Really? Can you feel the tension in the air right now?
Even though this effort was well received at the time of its release by critics, the box office was modest, as Jacob's Ladder had to make room for Chucky and Child's Play 2 during its second weekend.
How's it hanging, Phil?
A cult following would eventually follow, but it can be argued that not enough people know about this little holy grail of horror, and that's why we got you covered as we dive into the darkest corners of our minds and talk about the best horror movie you never saw. I want to thank you guys for watching the best horror movie you never saw, and ask that if you enjoy our shows, please subscribe to our channel right now. Like the video and click on the bell so you can be notified each time a new video goes up. And now, back to the show. Jacob's Ladder is set in 1970s New York, and it follows a postal worker named Jacob Singer, a man that is haunted by his experiences in Vietnam, along with the death of his young son, played by an uncredited Macaulay Culkin just weeks before he protected his home from Joe Pesci and Daniel Stern in Home Alone.
Hello.
He is truly a broken man, and his life is hampered even further when he becomes overcome by vivid hallucinations of demonic-like creatures. In fact, Jacob's life seems to be one waking nightmare, as the line between reality and fantasy is consistently blurred for the character and the audience. Revealing more is a true disservice to the viewer, because the less you know, the more frightening the experience is. Since most of the movie feels like a dream you can't escape, it's only fitting that his very own dream inspired writer Bruce Joel Rubin in the 80s to bring this story to life. Rubin details that the dream, which was more of a nightmare, began on a subway in New York. In describing the event, the writer said, "I had a dream where I get off the train and end up trapped in a subway station with no exits. I realized the only way out is down through the dark tunnel of the subway into some kind of awful hell. But I have to make that journey because ultimately, it's the journey into my own liberation." This dream set up Rubin's journey with the script, which began in 1980. Oddly enough, he would also start working on the treatment for a completely different movie at the same time, which eventually became 1990's Ghost, starring Patrick Swayze. That year, this screenwriter made moviegoers cry their eyes out during the summer of 1990 before making them want to sleep with the light on by the fall.
Ditto.
Now that's talent. The road wasn't easy to get the screenplay out there. After making Los Angeles his home base to truly make it as a writer, Rubin was frequently told that his script was too out there and, as he puts it, too metaphysical. He was also told that ghosts were a tough sell, but boy, would he prove them wrong with the 1-2 punch of the projects he was working on. A story is always too something before the right eyes land on it, and that happened when the script for Jacob's Ladder was named one of the best unproduced screenplays in Hollywood and American Film Magazine.
Let the boy watch.
Just to show how terrifying it all was on the page, the article says it's one of the very few screenplays with the power to consistently raise hackles in broad daylight. Years would go by before the movie really got off the ground, and a lot of the wait was finding the right director who respected Rubin's story and would stay true to the original script as intended. The likes of Sidney Lumet, Michael Apted, and Ridley Scott all circled the project, but director Adrian Lyne truly understood what this film was all about. As a prospect to direct, Lyne seemed like an offbeat choice. This was the man behind Flashdance, 9.5 Weeks, and Fatal Attraction. Nothing on his mainstream filmography hinted that he had an eye for deep psychological horror, but he was coming off a huge hit with Fatal Attraction, a movie that brought big box office and even garnered significant Academy Award nominations. The success gave him clout, which put him in the right place to take on something so ambitious. Jacob's Ladder would be set up at Paramount Pictures along with Ghost, but issues with ownership and other policy changes at the studio led to the cancellation of the former. Paramount reportedly also took issue with the scenes set in Vietnam and the film's ending. Thankfully, independent company Carolco Pictures stepped in to save the day and gave the project a $25 million budget and more creative control to Lyne. While the director says he initially considered Tom Hanks for the lead role in the film, it was ultimately Tim Robbins that landed the part of Jacob Singer. The casting is another example of this project taking chances because Robbins was primarily known as a comedic actor at the time, and he was mostly featured in supporting roles. This was Robbins' chance to lead a movie in a genuinely demanding dramatic role, but it was another project from the film's screenwriter that the actor really wanted to be a part of. According to Robbins, Tim wanted to star in Ghost, but the writer knew he was suitable for Jacob's Ladder. Giving one of the most exhausting and affecting performances of his career, this was the part he was meant to play, and it still stands up as one of his best dramatic turns. For the role of Jessie, played by Elizabeth Pena, Lyne said he saw more than 300 women for the part, including Demi Moore, Julia Roberts, Jennifer Lopez, and Madonna. Pena was the first actress to audition, and she was ultimately cast. Danny Aiello, Matt Craven, Puett Taylor-Vince, Jason Alexander, Ving Rhames, and Eric LaSalle round off a pretty eclectic supporting cast of familiar faces. Even though Lyne and Rubin aligned on many things, the director did make some visual changes to the descriptions made by Rubin in his script. He wanted to move away from the Old Testament demons that haunt Jacob in the screenplay to something more human, but still deeply disturbing. This played along with the themes of not truly knowing the difference between reality and fantasy, and it touches on how dreams sometimes skew perceptions. You'll see growths coming out of someone's head and other deformities rather than typical spiritual imagery. The director also wanted to do as much possible with practical effects in camera. Fans of the film consistently point to the faceless, vibrating figures that become burned into your brain, and this was all done with actors being recorded shaking their heads at a low frame rate. When it's played sped up, it gives the movie some of its most iconic pieces of visual horror. According to the filmmakers, it should be noted that no post-production effects were used in the final cut. Doesn't this just make you miss the simplicity and creativity of filmmaking from back in the day? There were some passionate disagreements about the ending as well. Rubin envisioned a biblical conclusion that would have Jacob set on fire by Jessie before he went to heaven on the Jacob's Ladder from the Book of Genesis. Since Lyne was firm about not using any post-production special effects, Lyne opted for the more subdued yet still highly effective ending that we got in the final cut. The ultimate conclusion of Jacob lying on his deathbed rather than fighting the demonic Jessie was one of the reasons why Paramount shut down the production before Carolco came along. Paramount did not like Adrian Lyne's ending, but he refused to change it. When their demands weren't met, the studio backed out. In all honesty, the movie's final moment, which sees his son Gabe leaving him up the staircase into the bright light before we finally get answers to everything that has been going on, is a hauntingly beautiful moment. Jacob's Ladder was the subject of test screenings before its release, and it did shape the final product. Initial test screenings were said to confuse most viewers, so 20 minutes was trimmed from the film. In Lyne's audio commentary on the DVD and Blu-ray, the director admitted that the test screening crowd was overwhelmed by some of the disturbing scenes that were eventually cut, with most coming from the movie's last third. Probably the biggest cut was Jessie's demonic transformation, which can now be viewed as a deleted scene on the DVD and Blu-ray release. Jacob's Ladder hit screens on November 2nd, 1990 and opened at the number 1 in the box office with a gross of $7.5 million. A number 1 finish is always solid, but another horror movie was looming in the distance just a week later, and that was Child's Play 2, which took the top spot that weekend with a gross of $10.7 million. Jacob's Ladder fell to second following Chucky's arrival, holding decently at $5 million, but it dropped off faster than anticipated and ended its box office run with $26.1 million after 63 days of release. For those keeping count, that's just a single smidge over its $25 million budget, so its theatrical run wasn't entirely profitable. To indicate what some moviegoers thought at the time, the film earned a not-so-great C- cinema score, which shows that mainstream moviegoers didn't embrace this one at the time of its release. Unlike most horror films, Jacob's Ladder was positively received by most critics, carrying a 73% fresh rating on Rotten Tomatoes. The consensus reads, "Even with its disorienting leaps of logic and structure, Jacob's Ladder is an engrossing, nerve-shattering experience." One of the most notable to give the film high notices was Roger Ebert, who gave it 3.5 stars and said it left him reeling with the turmoil and confusion with feelings of sadness and despair. These were all compliments because this is essentially how most come out of the experience after the first watch. Jacob's Ladder has become a cult classic as it found a much larger life on home video thanks to horror aficionados singing its praises. The movie is also said to have inspired the Silent Hill video game franchise and the 2006 film adaptation. Writer Ryan Murphy also noted that the film inspired American Horror Story Asylum, the second season of the hit anthology horror series. Sadly, a remake was made in 2019, and it is one misguided misfire. The film stars Michael Ealy, Jesse Williams, Nicole Beharie, Carla Souza, and Guy Burnett. The remake was first broadcast on Dish Network before earning a theatrical release that resulted in overwhelmingly negative reviews, carrying a 4% on Rotten Tomatoes. The consensus reads, "A needless remake that quickly loses sight of the themes that elevated the original. This is a Jacob's Ladder that leads straight to nowhere." Putting the ill-conceived remake aside, the original Jacob's Ladder remains one of the most disturbingly psychological horror films to grace the genre. There's a beauty in its nightmarish landscape, and it's a movie that grabs a hold of you tight without ever letting go. There's also a calmness about it all once everything wraps up, the search of peace as one remains in limbo between living and dying. For all the hellish images we see throughout, the film is ultimately about allowing your mind to let go and find your supreme serenity. A piece of Jacob's Ladder will forever stay with you, and that's a testament of an effectively haunting experience.